The rain was relentless, a constant drumming against the window pane that seemed to echo the unease in my chest. I stood at the entrance of the old Victorian house, its stone facade darkened by decades of weather and neglect. The letter in my hand felt heavier than it should have, as if the ink itself bore the weight of secrets. The letter had arrived unexpectedly, its envelope yellowed and edges worn. It was addressed to my late mother, Eleanor Parker, a name that felt like a whisper from a past I barely understood. She had passed away 5 years ago, leaving behind a modest inheritance and a shoebox of keepsakes, photos of people I had never met, trinkets that held no meaning to me, and now this letter. It was from a place I had never heard of, Ashgrove Manor, an estate far removed from the bustling city life I knew. Curiosity gnawed at me, pushing me to make the 3-hour drive through winding roads and misty hills to the address scrawled on the brittle paper. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and pushed open the creaking gate. The garden was overgrown, thorny vines coiling around rusted garden furniture, weeds choking what might have once been vibrant flower beds. The path to the front door was barely visible, a trail of cracked stones half buried in the earth. I knocked. The sound was swallowed by the house's darkened windows. After a moment, I tried the door handle. It turned easily, the door swinging inward with a low groan. I hesitated, every instinct urging me to leave, but curiosity won. I stepped inside. The interior was a time capsule. Dust hung in the air, motes dancing in the pale grey light filtering through heavy drapes. Furniture sat under white sheets, their shapes ghostly and undefined. A grand staircase curved up into shadows, and hallways stretched into the unknown. "Hello?" My voice seemed to be devoured by the silence. No answer. I moved deeper into the house, my footsteps muffled by thick, patterned rugs. Paintings lined the walls, stern faces from centuries past, eyes following me as I passed. Each room told a story of a life paused, objects left, as if someone might return at any moment. A teacup still on its saucer, a book left open on a side table, an umbrella propped against the doorframe. The letter had mentioned someone named Margaret, a caretaker, but the house felt utterly abandoned. I pulled out my phone, the screen casting a cold blue glow, but there was no signal. Of course. I found my way into a parlor. The fireplace was cold, the ashes long undisturbed. I sat on the edge of a faded armchair, the springs creaking under my weight. I unfolded the letter again, the paper soft and fragile. "Dear Eleanor, I hope this letter finds you well. The years have been unkind to Ashgrove, but it remains a home filled with your memory. Margaret is still here, as loyal as ever, but age has taken its toll on us both. There is much I wish to say, secrets I have kept for too long. Please, come back. It is time. Yours, Charles." The words were heavy with regret, but they raised more questions than they answered. Who was Charles? Why had my mother never mentioned Ashgrove Manor or the people within it? A sound broke the silence, a soft creak, like a floorboard settling. I stood abruptly, the letter slipping from my hands to the floor. My eyes darted to the doorway, but it remained empty. I strained to hear, but only the rain responded, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. "Margaret?" I called out, my voice shaking slightly. Nothing. I gathered the letter and moved back toward the entrance, but as I passed the staircase, something drew my attention. A light, dim, flickering, spilled from the upstairs hallway. I had not seen it when I entered. My pulse quickened. a drumbeat in my ears. I should leave, get back to my car, find cell service and call someone, anyone. But my feet moved on their own, taking me up the stairs, each step an echo that bounced off the walls and returned to me distorted. At the top, the hallway stretched out, lined with closed doors. The light seeped from a room at the far end, a thin line beneath the door. I moved forward, my hand trailing along the faded wallpaper. The door was ajar, the light swaying as if from a candle. I nudged it open and found myself in a bedroom. It was pristine compared to the rest of the house. The bed was made, a quilt neatly tucked at the corners. A vanity sat by the window, the mirror reflecting the rain-streaked glass. And there, in the corner, sat a woman. Her back was to me, her hair grey and tied into a loose bun. She wore a simple dress, pale and worn, and her hands rested in her lap. "Margaret?" I whispered. The woman did not move. I took a cautious step forward. The floor groaned, and finally she turned. Her eyes were milky, unfocused, her skin pale and stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I was frozen, my breath caught in my throat. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she raised a hand and pointed. Her finger directed me to the vanity, where a small, ornate box sat. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, but I moved to the vanity, my fingers brushing over the cold metal of the box. It opened easily, revealing a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. As I touched them, the room seemed to shift. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. I turned back to Margaret, but the chair was empty. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. I didn't understand, but I knew. Whatever truth lay within these letters, it was something my mother had never intended me to find. The box of letters felt alive in my hands, its cold metal sending a shiver through my spine. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress stiff and unyielding. My fingers worked at the ribbon, which crumbled to dust as I pulled it loose. The letters, worn and yellowed, seemed to exhale dust and secrets as I lifted the first one. The handwriting was delicate, loops and swirls that mirrored the ornate carvings on the vanity. It was a letter from Charles, another plea for my mother to return. But this one was different. It spoke of love, of a bond forged in the shadows of Ashgrove Manor. As I read, the world around me seemed to dim, the edges of the room blurring, as if I was sinking into the past. My dearest Eleanor, the house has grown colder since you left. Margaret keeps the fires burning, but the warmth is gone. I walk these halls and hear your laughter, see your shadow in the garden. I know what we did was wrong, what we concealed beneath the weight of propriety and fear. But I cannot live with these ghosts alone. You must return. We must make things right. Yours always, Charles. A chill crept into my bones. This wasn't just a love letter. It was a confession. I dug deeper into the stack, each letter peeling back layers of a story I had never known. Through Charles's letters, I learned of a hidden romance between him and my mother. She had lived at Ashgrove in her youth, a young woman working as a governess for Charles's son, Thomas. Their love was a secret, overshadowed by the rigid expectations of the time. But something had happened, something dark. A different letter, dated later, was hurriedly written. The ink smeared, as if the pen had trembled in his grip. Eleanor, I cannot sleep. Margaret says I am seeing things, that the cries in the night are nothing but the wind. But I know the truth. I saw him, Thomas, standing by the well. His eyes were empty, his lips blue as frost. I reached for him, but he vanished, a whisper lost in the fog. What did we do? What price will we pay? Charles. My hands shook. I struggled to breathe. Thomas, the boy my mother had cared for, was dead. But not naturally. The letters hinted at an accident, perhaps more. I felt the weight of the room pressing in on me, the shadows at the edge of my vision seeming to pulse. I turned toward the vanity, my reflection pale and distorted in the old mirror. Behind me, the room seemed to stretch, the corners darkening. I thought of Margaret, of how she had appeared and disappeared like smoke. Was she real? Or was she one of these restless spirits, bound to the house by the sins of its past? My mind raced. If Thomas had died, if my mother and Charles had been involved, why had she hidden it? Why had she left and never spoken of this place, of these people? The answers lay in these letters, but with every word, the truth seemed more terrible. Another letter, this one from Margaret. Eleanor, he is losing his mind. Charles sees Thomas everywhere. He calls out in the night, believing the boy will answer. But we both know the truth. The well was supposed to be his resting place, but now the ground itself seems to reject our deeds. You must come. You must help us put him to rest, before it is too late. Margaret. My pulse thundered in my ears. The well. I had seen it in the overgrown garden, a stone structure choked with ivy. A shiver ran through me as if the ground itself had breathed against my skin. A sudden noise snapped me back to reality. A thud from downstairs. The front door. I clutched the letters to my chest, my mind spinning. Was I truly alone here? I forced myself to move, my legs heavy as I stumbled out of the room. The hallway seemed narrower, the portraits on the walls twisted by shadows. Faces that had once been stern now seemed to sneer, their painted eyes glinting with malice. Hello? My voice cracked, swallowed by the oppressive silence. Another noise, this time from the parlor. I edged down the staircase, the old wood protesting under my weight. I reached the bottom and saw it. The parlor door, which I had left open, was now shut. I pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. My hand trembled as I turned the knob. The door swung inward, revealing the dim room just as I had left it, or so I thought. The armchair where I had sat was now occupied. A figure slumped there. A man, his suit dark and old-fashioned. His head lolled to the side, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might be asleep. But then I saw the pallor of his skin, the stillness of his chest. It was Charles. A letter lay open on his lap, the same ornate handwriting sprawled across the page. I stepped closer, my breath misting in the cold air. His eyes snapped open, milky, unfocused. His lips moved, and a rasping sound filled the room, like dry leaves in the wind. Help us. My scream never found my lips. The room twisted around me, the shadows swallowing Charles and the parlor whole. I stumbled back, crashing into the hallway, the letters scattering around me like fallen leaves. I crawled to my feet, the house groaning as if waking from a long slumber. The front door was so close, just a few more steps. I lunged for it, fingers closing around the cold brass handle. But the door did not budge. The house would not let me go. The door would not open. My hands, slick with sweat, slipped against the brass handle as I pulled and pushed, but it remained as immovable as the stone walls surrounding me. The house groaned, the timbers stretching as if breathing, and I felt the cold press of unseen eyes on my back. I turned, pressing myself against the door. The hallway seemed to stretch, the shadows crawling over the faded wallpaper, swallowing the portraits until only darkness remained. My pulse hammered in my throat, my breath coming in ragged gasps that clouded the air. "Help us." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that brushed against my skin. I clutched the letters to my chest, their edges sharp against my fingers. These ghosts, they weren't just memories. They were here, trapped, and I had stumbled into their prison. I needed to get out. The only light came from the upstairs room, still flickering like a dying candle. I forced myself forward, each step dragging as if wading through deep water. The floorboards creaked, the sound echoing back at me in strange, distorted tones. "Thomas?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure why. His name felt heavy on my tongue, as if uttering it would call him forth. The letters had revealed so much. His death, the guilt of my mother and Charles, the secret burial by the well. I understood now why my mother had never spoken of this place. Ashgrove Manor was a tomb. I reached the base of the stairs. The dim light above beckoned, and despite every instinct to run, I began to climb. My footfalls were soft, yet each one seemed to reverberate through the house. Halfway up, the temperature plummeted. I could see my breath, each exhale a silver cloud. "Put him to rest." The voice again, this time more distinct. Margaret? Charles? Or perhaps Thomas himself? I did not know. I only knew that I had to finish what they could not. The well. The letters had spoken of it, their attempt to bury the truth along with the boy. But the earth had rejected him. His spirit had lingered, turning the house into a mausoleum, trapping them all within its walls. At the top of the stairs, the door to the bedroom stood open. The vanity mirror reflected nothing but darkness, and the bed sat perfectly made, as if waiting for someone to lie down and never rise again. I turned away, forcing myself down the hallway, through a side door, and into the kitchen. The garden lay beyond the narrow glass doors. Outside, the rain had turned the earth to mud, but the overgrown path was still visible. The well sat at the far end, a dark silhouette against the twisted trees. I took a deep breath, bracing myself, and pushed the door open. The cold bit into me, the rain stinging my skin as I stumbled into the garden. Each step sank into the wet earth, pulling at my shoes. The letters, now damp, were pressed to my chest. I felt as if I were wading through years of decay, every step drawing me deeper into the truth. The well loomed before me. Stones, slick with moss, framed the dark opening. Ivy twisted around the stones, and water pooled at its base, black and still. I peered over the edge. There was no bottom, only an endless void that seemed to pull at my mind, threatening to swallow me whole. I unfolded the letters, my fingers numb. The final note from Margaret lay on top, the ink blurred by moisture but still legible. "We tried to bury him, but he will not rest. You must come, Eleanor. You must set him free." My throat tightened. I understood now. My mother had run from this place, from her sins, but the burden had fallen to me. I had been called here not by coincidence, but by fate. I reached into the well, my arm disappearing into the cold void. The stones were wet and sharp, but beneath them, something moved. My fingers brushed fabric, something soft, decayed. I pulled, and the earth seemed to exhale around me. A small bundle emerged, wrapped in cloth that crumbled at my touch. Bones, tiny and fragile, rested within. My vision blurred, the rain mixing with tears as I realized what I held. Thomas. The air grew thick, the shadows pressing in. Faces swam in my periphery. Charles, Margaret, even my mother. Their expressions frozen in grief and regret. They had been waiting, bound to this place by their failure to give Thomas peace. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." With gentle hands, I lowered the bones into the earth. I began to cover them, the mud cold and slick against my skin. I spoke softly, words of comfort, of rest, of forgiveness. I didn't know if he could hear me, but I hoped he could. As the last of the bones disappeared beneath the soil, the wind shifted. The oppressive weight lifted, and for the first time since I entered Ashgrove Manor, I felt warmth. The house, once a dark silhouette against the storm, now stood still. The lights inside flickered, but this time with a steady, welcoming glow. The door behind me, which had been locked, now stood open. I rose, my body heavy but my spirit light. I made my way back inside, the letters left behind, their purpose fulfilled. The hallway, once twisted and dark, now seemed ordinary. The portraits were simply paintings, their eyes no longer following me. I stepped through the door, onto the front porch. The rain had stopped, and dawn brushed the sky with pale hues. I turned back once, half expecting to see faces at the windows, but there was nothing, only a quiet, empty house. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching underfoot. The engine started on the first try, and as I pulled away, Ashgrove Manor disappeared into the mist, finally at peace.